I think we can learn from the life of Joseph that there are at least 3 particular things that God is doing in the aftermath of betrayal that sculpts us into the kind of people we need to be to actually realize, embrace, and fulfill our dreams and righteous ambitions. The first thing I would say is this: God is purifying us. That's the first thing God does in the aftermath of betrayal. He purifies us. See, here's what happens. We all carry around some internal saboteurs that undermine our efforts at achieving our life dream, of being successful where it really matters, of living that really best life. We carry around internal saboteurs like character flaws. We carry around internal saboteurs like twisted beliefs about ourselves, about God, about others, about life. We carry internal saboteurs like relational dysfunction, quirks that keep us from really connecting with and partnering with other people as we can and as we want to. And the thing about these internal saboteurs is they tend to live under the surface of our lives, and while we might be aware that there's something in there, we can be largely blind to their presence and power at undermining the kind of life that we really want to live and we know God has called us and wants us to lead us into living. And what happens is that the aftermath of betrayal, with all of its pain and its frustration and its confusion and its anguish, all of that turmoil tends to surface those internal saboteurs so we can see them more clearly, we can understand their power more acutely, and we will be motivated to change. When I was in high school for several summers, I got a job working for various farmers. And inevitably, when the spring of the year would come, they would put me on the same task. I was to go out into the fields, and I was to remove stones. I mean, some of them weren't very big. Some of them were actually pretty big. And I would just go, and I'd drive there, and I'd find them, throw it in the bucket of the tractor, and then I'd dump them where I was supposed to. And I did that one year, and then the next year, they sent me out to do the same thing. And I remember thinking, you know, I did this last year. Trust me, all the stones are gone. Really, I did a good job. And I drove those same fields, and you know what I found? Stones. Some of them pretty big. And I'm going, how did I miss this last year? And what I was then taught was I didn't miss them last year. But something really interesting happens with the earth and the change of the seasons. You have the heat of the summer and then the transition in the fall, and you have that cold, cold winter with its snows and winds, and then you have the thawing that takes place in the spring, and then moving again to the heat of the summer, and all of that pressure, all that temperature change, everything that happened to the earth actually causes stones to work their way up to the surface of the soil. So that every year there are new ones that appear that need to be removed so that the field can be tilled and planted and harvested. The pressure on the planet causes the stones to surface so they can be removed. Something similar happens to you and me. The pressure of life, often the pressure of betrayal, causes things to squeeze and to get churned up deep in our spirit, and stones begin to surface in our lives. Character flaws and twisted beliefs and relational dysfunctions, so that we can go, wow, look at that. That was in me all along, and I never really realized it. Not like this. And when we can see it, we can then take the steps to remove it so that it no longer undermines our righteous endeavors. This is what happened to Joseph. See, Joseph had some saboteurs that lurked under the surface of his heart. For instance, we find in Genesis chapter 36 that Joseph was a tattletale. It said that he was out with his older brothers, and they were tending the fields, and apparently they didn't do a really good job, or they were kind of slacking off or whatever. But rather than confronting them about it, rather than talking to them about it, rather than trying to work on a solution, he said nothing, but he went home to Dad and said, "You know what? Your other sons are doing a really bad job over there. You really need to do something about that. They're slacking off." And he had another little character flaw. He was a little bit cocky. He got this dream from God, actually a couple of them, and they both indicated that sometime in Joseph's future, he would end up being in a prominent position, and his family members would actually express humbly their gratitude for Joseph and what he had done to somehow bless them. It's a vision that Joseph had about something that was going to happen in his future. And what he did is he shared that with his brothers. And I could just imagine how he shared it. Hey, guess what? God has given me a dream, and the day's going to come when I'm basically going to save you, and you're going to bow down in gratitude before me. Isn't that cool? It's like, come on, dude. Who do you think you are? So he's a little bit cocky. See, the deal is kind of this. If you're going to end up being a political powerhouse in the nation-saving business, you can't afford to be someone who doesn't know how to confront someone when there's a problem. You can't be afford to someone who talks around other people's backs rather than directly to them if there's an issue. You can't afford to be someone a little carried away with your own sense of importance and prominence. You've got to keep a humble, balanced spirit. And yet God wanted Joseph inevitably to be that nation-saving kind of person. But he had to get rid of these character flaws first. And he used the sting of betrayal to help purify his life. And what he did in him, he does with us. There's a second thing that God is doing when he takes us on this different path that betrayal sends us on the way to our righteous dreams. And that is that God is preparing us. See, sometimes the reason that we can't really embrace and live out and fulfill our righteous dreams and God's ultimate purpose for our lives is not because of the presence of flaws, but the absence of strengths. We may not have the skills necessary to do it. We might not have the experience necessary to do it. We might not have the understanding or the faith to be able to do it. We lack some important strength to get it done. And what God will do is he will take us through times of difficulty in order to strengthen us, to give us the skills, the experience, the understanding that we might be able to inhabit the future that God has really destined for us. Back in March of 1997, Greg Horn was flying back from a leadership conference and catching a connecting flight in St. Louis, Missouri on his way back to Lexington, Kentucky. However, because of bad weather back in Kentucky, his flight was delayed and then finally canceled. Not to worry, the next morning he got up and caught the first flight out of town. And as he was flying over that section of Kentucky, he began to realize how devastating the weather actually was. Because torrential rains had flooded the area. Rivers were overflowing their banks, including Licking River, which went right through the middle of the town where Greg happened to own a Food Saver grocery store. As he was preparing to land, he began to worry, man, I wonder what shape my store is in. He had gotten into the food business because he wanted to impact people. He wanted to help people on a grassroots level. He used to work for Hershey and had like $1.2 million sales territory. But he got out of that, which was really a pretty good life, so he could really work with people and try to help them through the food business. After he landed, he tried to get downtown, but he couldn't get there because it was all closed because of the flood. From the edge of the town, he was able to look down, and the only thing he could see of his store was the top of the sign. It was totally underwater. It took him 5 days to get back in the store. When he got back there, it was just absolutely devastating. Over $500,000 of wasted inventory. All of the cash registers